Well, as we open up this new set of operating rounds, and we're going to have two operating rounds between the stock rounds, the NYC starts things up upgrading Albany with the intention of hitting both New Yorks, essentially. He's got a couple of 3 trains, so it's kind of a neat run. He's got 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. He wishes he had just a teeny bit more train, but, well, or could curve in this way, but there's no way of working it out with this track line. He still doesn't want to drop a dot here. He doesn't have much point in it yet. Sometimes there is a reason. What he did, though, is the first time this game, I think, he made 60, 120, 130, 160 bucks total. He swallowed that into the company treasury. He only owns 40% of the company. He's got to kind of maintain it in good shape, and wants to get enough money to buy a permanent train sometime fairly soon. So that's only a couple $100. He's probably got to swallow a couple of times, which is a painful prospect, to tell you the truth. But he doesn't see another real out, except maybe getting the Erie. But priorities over here. He doesn't think he's going to get control of that last railroad. So he's going to try to dig this one out and make it work as well as he can. So at the end of the first operating round, we push down to the second here. Who was cautious there? I don't remember who it was who swallowed. The NYC certainly did. The B&O also, I believe, did. Just kind of padding their money. Now the B&O is in better shape with a 4 train there, but you never know how fast things will fall. They wanted to grab some money towards getting the bigger trains ahead of time. Now, all the new companies just bought trains that were available. So the B&M has a 4. They could have bought a train off the Pennsylvania, and that would have shaken things up a little bit, given the Penn money, maybe to jump in. But here's the problem: the B&M actually goes before the Penn, so there wasn't really too much opportunity there. No reason to swallow with the Penn. It's just not making enough. Likewise, the CP, with all of its shares in here, didn't have a reason to swallow. Some of these other companies, well, they had to buy a train. The NY and H&H would have loved not to buy that last 4 train, because they know things are going to break, and they want to get a 5, and they don't really have money for it. They'd have to swallow to get it anyhow. But it's just kind of a troubling situation right now for all of these companies. They all know that they're at risk. And it's a position you always kind of walk into in this game is, geez, am I going to be able to get... And sometimes you can say, I know I can get. In the case of the NYNH, he knows he can get one of these permanent trains, and that it'll be sufficient for him. But he wants more. He'd like to get 2. That would make him a rocking company. It's not going to happen. He chose not to buy the D&H, though, and likewise the NYC made a choice not to do anything with the Mohawk and Hudson. He would have had to do this during the stock round, to sell a share and redeem it with the Mohawk and Hudson. And the problem there is if somebody else sold a share, he couldn't buy it, so he'd be at 40%. It's possible if a couple of shares sold, he'd lose his company. He can cash it in. I don't think the CP is going to buy the first 5 train. We'll see. But that's a lot of money out of his only corporation that's kind of struggling. It may be what he wants to do, however. We'll see. It would certainly give him the cash for the Erie, even if maybe position-wise he's not going to be able to get it. Well, with only 40% of his company, he swallowed again. That didn't give him quite enough money to build the 5 train. Well, maybe if he had not bought that dot there, 220, 250. Nah, he would have been at about 400, I think, total. I think that's what his net was without the dot. So he put this dot down, which gives him a little bit more money on the swallow, and also kind of is an insurance position. He still wants one of these dots, but there's no guarantee of getting that. But what he doesn't want to do is be blocked from making it into those spaces because they're more valuable in most cities. What was the run worth? 60, 70, sorry, 60, 70, that's why he went there. 130, 160, 210 bucks swallowed. And then he used most of that money to buy the Mohawk and Hudson, giving himself a big pile of cash. At the very least, he can invest in other companies, etc. So if he does have to pay out of pocket for a train, maybe it's not as expensive. We'll see how that all works out. He's not thrilled with this. He kind of wanted to buy one of these 5 trains and solidify his company so he doesn't end up in the bad seat with it. But, well, if this guy passes and doesn't get rid of his NYCs, there's potential that he might drop the company. It's not a bad company. It's just, certainly he would have insured the passes if he had paid out twice here and bought the Mohawk and Hudson. Some kind of radical moves by the B&O. First of all, he dropped a dot in down here, which is sort of saying, yeah, I'm going to be pretty hard to cut out. Because if I can control the track lay here, I get in this way. Although somebody like the NYC can cut that. And B&O can't play a second dot there. And from this one, well, you're not going to push me through that way. So he's almost insuring himself the 2 New Yorks, he thinks. He also paid out $23 a share. Paid 450 bucks out of his cash. Remember, it was $1,000 in there for the first 5 train, and that changes things royally. He's got to dump this 3 train. It's not dead. It's sitting in the bank pool. Anybody can buy it for 180 bucks, and it might be worth it for some people, although I don't know, because the 5s generally drop pretty quickly, and then we're at the 6s, which killed the 3 train. The other effect is it's going to bring out the brown tiles, which I'll set up in a moment, and upgrade the prices here. He had to dump the train because he's only allowed 2 trains now. But this changes the dynamics. That sort of first 5 train, it looked like it was going to go maybe to the B&M holder, who actually, if he bought one, the C&O bought one, the B&M maybe could have shifted enough money on the 3 train that the Penn could have bought one. Hard to see how this is all falling out, but things might not be as rosy as they looked over in B&M land a moment ago. They weren't going to be great, but I don't think anybody's really, it doesn't look like anybody's falling into a really powerful position here, out of cleverness or otherwise. Well, we'll see where it goes. Alright, and when we got to the Penn, they ran for their minuscule little 13 a share. Can't really dominate here. If the B&O hadn't placed this token here, you would have seen the Penn hook up New York, put their own token there, and be the dominant factor. That's not happening, though. The B&O's move was interesting, I'll say that much for it. I don't know if it's going to work or if it's going to cause some kind of collision where maybe the B&O doesn't have this and isn't really hooked up. Hard to tell where it's all going to go, or if the B&O really wanted this one so that they could go New York to New York. All interesting. The Penn spent all but $1 that it had, I don't know, 200 and something bucks to grab that big old 5 train off the B&M. The B&M doesn't really need a 5 train right now, and they're going to want better perhaps later. They've got 1, 2, 3, 4. They can hit a 5th maybe. But in their desire, it's 1, 2, 3, 4. No, they can't do that. I don't know what they can do. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, at least a 6 that they're probably going to want. Now they could kind of ditch around, cut down here and cut this one off, and that gets them down to a 6 getting into here, which is probably the best run that they're going to do. So that's kind of what they're hoping for. They don't have enough cash, but maybe with a swallow they'll end up with it. And now for our last little operator this round. It's the NYNH. Doesn't have a permanent train and really does need to get one. And they're fine on getting something fairly small. 6 is the smallest that they see around. And as we end things here, the NYNH, not in terribly good shape. You know, it started at a low price, 71. If it was starting at about 1,000, it could have picked up that 6 train pretty easily. It ended up upgrading track so it can get into New York twice, putting a dot down there. Now, that kind of stymies everyone from the South's entrance into New York. And with the Penn saying, hey, or the B&O saying, I kind of control the entrance into New York this way, they're also going to be stymieing the NYC being able to cut down. We're not really worried about the NYNH and H. It doesn't have a lot of dots. It's not going to cut through anywhere, no matter what. So that puts us in an interesting little situation. Where, as usual, New York is not an easy place to cut through and score when you end up doing this double crossing through it. Just too many people are playing down there and it's too valuable. Okay, so we went back a point, gathered up some money. We should be able to buy a 6 train or maybe a diesel if we can get the bonus priced one. Here's the problem, though. We gotta run through everyone else before we get a shot at that. It may not be there by then. The 6 train, the cheap diesel, they may be gone. There's a lot of companies going, and he doesn't have anything that he can rely on unless he has enough cash to start the Erie. And everybody's kind of looking at the Erie as the bailout at this point. It's often used in that way. All right. There was other stuff I wanted to talk about. Oh yeah, all the private companies are gone. They disappeared when the 5 came out. I just wanted to highlight that because they've been producing money every operating round, either for the corporation or for the player. All right, interesting stock round coming up. Well, the first player sees that the Erie is the only way to save himself as far as he can tell. He doesn't think the CP, and he's only got 4 shares of the damn thing, can hold up. He's got no easy way of dealing with it. Ooh, maybe he could actually up the money in the Erie by dumping another CP. CPs are worth a fortune. 120. Yeah. So anyway, he's going to start the Erie as a pure feeder at 90 bucks a share. Some of his hope here is actually that he won't lose much money off of it, and that his CP shares he'll be able to, with their high stock value, run things out. And the way this game has kind of gone out, the trains have come out very fast compared to the income. People have been too willing to buy companies, maybe. So his hope is that perhaps he can get a decent placement by somebody else crashing. Now, what's weird here is that, and this is the problem that I see with, say, the WBC. People go into it and may not position themselves in a position where they can guarantee survival. They're not so worried about that. If they can crush someone else, and that's their strategy, and they force someone else, basically, if they're in the position where they have maybe a 50-50 chance of going bankrupt, but one of the other players does too, and it's going to be one of them that wins if they both play chicken, that's the way to perhaps enhance your chance of winning the game. I haven't seen that working too much in the groups that I played with where people are more careful and more cautious, but I can see why it would work. I don't think I'd be happy playing in that kind of game where people are just kind of playing chicken trying to see who crashes first, because what that can devolve into is those players swapping trains and doing kind of tricky stuff to keep from crashing. And the game just drags on with this slow decline of those powers because neither one can really be destroyed fully by it. On the other hand, if someone survives a crash, if you misjudged how badly they can do and they don't go bankrupt, then you may go bankrupt or even worse, be stripped aside. So to me, it's always best to play kind of safe. This is already an admission by the CP player. He ain't going to win the game. If he can't save his company and he can't clearly do well with it and had to sell all the shares he did, he's just not going to be in great shape. But at least he's not necessarily going to lose, he thinks. So remember, I'm playing with hidden money, and the rules actually state you keep the money hidden on the treasury mat. I wasn't certain that this was a game where that was the case. That put this guy in a dangerous position. He's holding NYC. It doesn't have a permanent train. It may not be in good shape, so he sold off his 2 shares of NYC, and we see the prices are dropping here, and picked up a B&O that's pretty much guaranteed to make more money anyway at this point. So he's got some additional money. He can buy additional stocks with that, but nothing really enticing is available. It's just he wanted to get out of his NYC market and not end up with the presidency that he didn't want. And that's what we're kind of ending up with, people throwing to a defensive status if they see a company that they think's risky, like the CP, the NYC. Obviously, things like the Erie or places where people have 2 companies or corporations, it's really risky. But even where they just have one, selling off your corporation isn't that terrible. You're giving up one of your certificate limit spaces, essentially. In exchange, though, and control on the board and everything. But in exchange, you're getting rid of a lot of risk. Alright, well, the holder of the NYC divested himself as well, and this put an interesting situation over here for the B&O owner, who's the only person holding a really healthy railroad with what looks like it might have the money to crank out and support one. He doesn't have the capital on the B&O, but nobody really was sure of this, not even me, not even him, because I'm playing him. So looking at the cash, I decided, well, he can't save it. So he also picked up other shares. The Erie sold out. That puts priority here, and it puts this guy on a big decision because he has enough money for really what looks like 2 shares, but when he starts to look at it, it's only 1. He could buy a B&M share for 90 bucks. He could also instead buy an Erie share for 90 bucks. Anything else would double him up. He doesn't want to do that. So he could add 1 share to his holdings. He's going to pass, figuring that whatever money the B&M with whatever shenanigans it's doing with the pen makes is not worth holding the priority at this point. And he doesn't quite have priority, but he's almost got it. So he gets to pick up the best winner and maybe get multiple shots at some rails. So that's kind of advantageous. I don't know how big a deal it is. Let's see what's sold out here. No, the B&O is, and I think that's probably it. Everything else has some kind of risk involved or is a newer company. So now we're going to be moving to a new set of operating rounds. This time there's going to be 3 operating rounds between the stock rounds. And I'll load this one up.